Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we plunge into the knowledge you need, serving up those aha moments you crave. Today, we're diving into something that, well, it touches every single one of our digital lives. How our personal data is actually protected. I mean, we talk about privacy and data security, but what does that truly mean in practice? What are the sort of hidden rules governing it all?
It's a fascinating area, isn't it? It's constantly evolving, deeply impacts everyone, and yet, like you said, it often remains a bit of a mystery. Our daily lives are just steeped in digital interactions. Think about online shopping or sharing health information with your doctor, even just browsing online. We hand over personal data constantly. But have you ever stopped to truly think about what safeguards are, actually in place?
And that's exactly our mission today. We're taking your sources, the research, and extracting the most important nuggets. We want to cut through the jargon, give you a shortcut to being truly well-informed. We're going to try and understand these unseen rules protecting your personal information, your financial transactions, basically shining a light on what's happening behind the scenes every time you click or swipe or share something online.
Mm-hmm.
Think of it as kind of peeling back the layers to see the digital fortresses supposedly built around your data.
Okay, so let's unpack this first bit. When we
Yeah.
talk about privacy laws, what are we really getting at? A lot of people might just think, oh, it's about keeping secrets, but it sounds like it's maybe more profound than that.
It really is. At its core, the primary purpose of privacy laws isn't just secrecy, although that's part of it. It's fundamentally about control. It's designed to protect an individual's private life. Yeah, keep personal details out of the public eye. But the real insight, I think, is that privacy gives you the ability to decide who sees your data, how it's used, and crucially, for what purposes. It's about empowerment. Empowerment, okay.
Oh,
Control.
exactly. And beyond that fundamental control, these laws play a vital role in building and maintaining trust. Trust between consumers, like you and me, and the enterprises we interact with, credit card companies, healthcare providers, online shops, you name it.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine entrusting a bank with your entire financial history or a hospital with your most intimate health details. You expect that information to be safeguarded, right?
Absolutely. You have to.
So, privacy regulations provide that assurance. They outline the rules for how your sensitive information must be collected, protected, and used. Without that basic level of trust, honestly, our digital economy just wouldn't function.
So it's almost like a silent handshake then
Yeah.
in the digital world, assuring your information is handled responsibly, that invisible pact where, okay, you agree to share and the company agrees to protect it. What does that pact actually mean in terms of how they handle the data?
Precisely. It is like a pact. And to make that trust real, these laws carefully regulate how entities entrusted with private info must collect it, process it, maintain it, and ultimately disclose it. Generally, there are some, let's say, universal requirements, the basic structure of that digital fort, as you called it. Those collecting your info must be really clear about what data they're gathering. No hidden clauses, no obscure fine print, ideally. Transparency is key. Then, they absolutely must keep it confidential, prevent unauthorized access, make sure only those people with a legitimate, defined need can actually see it.
And that's not just outsiders trying to break in, right? It's internal too.
Exactly. It's not just about malicious hackers. It's also about limiting internal access, preventing your data from just floating around freely within an organization or being seen by anyone who might stumble upon it. It's about data compartmentalization, keeping information secure within its specific authorized area.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Clarity on what's collected and knowing it's locked down. But here's where the fort sometimes crumbles, doesn't it? And this is where it gets, well, really interesting, or maybe a bit unsettling. The rise of the internet, cloud computing, it's meant this massive increase in data exchange. We're sending and receiving data constantly. And with this huge surge in available data, we've also seen a corresponding surge in something called data breaches.
Indeed. That's the flip side. A data breach, essentially, is when that confidential information gets exposed to unauthorized people. It's when that silent handshake is broken, and data that should have stayed private becomes accessible to someone who shouldn't have it. We usually categorize data breaches into two main types. First, you've got unintentional breaches.
Like accident.
Exactly. Resulting from negligence or just simple error, often human error. Think of an employee accidentally emailing a spreadsheet with sensitive customer data to the wrong person. Happens more than you'd think. Or maybe a developer misconfigures a server and inadvertently leaves a database exposed to the open internet. It's not malicious intent, but the outcome data exposure is the same.
And the second type.
The second category is intentional breaches. These are, well, much more nefarious. They result from bad actors, hackers, criminals illegally gaining access to data with malicious intent. This could involve sophisticated hacking attacks, exploiting software vulnerabilities, or phishing scams that trick employees into revealing login details. It could even be insider threats, where someone within the organization intentionally leaks data for personal gain, or maybe just to cause harm. The methods vary, but the goal is always unauthorized access to sensitive information.
And the consequences.
Yeah.
I mean, for the companies involved, they seem just staggering. It's not just the immediate disruption or losing the data itself. There's huge reputational harm, right? Customers lose trust. Trying to regain that must be incredibly hard.
Oh, incredibly hard. Sometimes impossible.
And then the financial losses, the legal costs, the regulatory fines. You mentioned a source, the IBM cost of data breach report for 2022. It said the average cost of a data breach is over $4 million.
That's right, over $4 million. And that figure really does underscore the severity.
It really brings it home. We're talking about a potentially catastrophic event for a company, not just, a minor hiccup.
Absolutely. And that $4 million figure, it's important to understand it's not just one single cost. It's actually made up of expenditures across 4 distinct categories, which shows just how multifaceted the impact is. First, there's the cost for detection and escalation. This covers all the forensics work, the investigation needed to identify the breach, understand how big it is, figure out what data was compromised, and crucially, fix the vulnerability that allowed it to happen. Often involves bringing in pricey external cybersecurity experts.
Okay, so finding and stopping the leak.
Right. Then there's the notification cost. Companies are legally required to notify the necessary parties. That means all the affected consumers, often by physical mail or email, which can be a massive logistical and financial task, especially if millions are affected. And they also have to notify the relevant regulatory bodies.
Okay, telling everyone. What's next?
The third category is post-breach response. This is about cleaning up the mess, rectifying the effects of the breach. This can mean paying significant regulatory fines, which can be huge in themselves. It often involves implementing credit monitoring services for affected consumers to help protect them from identity theft. And it includes ongoing communications and support to help people mitigate the harm.
So fixing the damage and helping the victims.
Correct. And finally, and this is often the most damaging in the long run, there's the loss of business and revenue. This includes temporary revenue loss during system downtime or operational halts caused directly by the breach. But more critically, it can lead to a permanent loss of customers. People lose faith in the company's ability to protect their information and they just leave. This results in an ongoing, multifaceted impact on their operations and their customer base. It's a wound that can really fester for years.
Wow. Okay, we've talked about these staggering corporate costs, the multi-million-dollar hits, but let's flip it. What about the personal cost? For you, the individual listener, a data breach isn't just a number on some corporate report. It's a deeply unsettling violation of your trust, your security. What stands out to you about how this affects individuals?
Well, for individuals, the impact is, as you say, deeply personal and often profoundly disruptive. A data breach means your most sensitive personal information gets exposed. We're talking full name, home address, maybe your social security number, and critically, your payment or banking information. When this kind of data gets out there, it puts consumers at immediate and serious risk.
What are the biggest risks then?
The ultimate risks for consumers are mainly twofold. First, identity theft. This is where criminals use your personal details, name, SSN, address to open fraudulent accounts, maybe take out loans, make unauthorized purchases, file false tax returns, or even commit crimes in your name. Cleaning that up can take an enormous amount of time, effort, stress, often years of credit monitoring and legal battles.
A nightmare.
Truly. The second main risk is direct monetary theft. This can happen if they get access to your bank accounts or credit cards. Or it can happen indirectly through sophisticated scams that are enabled by the leaked information. Imagine getting a very convincing phishing email, but it's tailored with details about you, maybe your account number, recent transactions, things. Only a hacker who got your data from a breach would know. Much harder to spot. It's a harrowing experience that can really erode your financial stability and just your general peace of mind.
Okay, so with all these risks, these complexities, what does this mean for how different parts of the world actually approach privacy regulation? Is there like a global rule book? Or is it more fragmented? You often hear about the Wild West of data out there.
Yeah, that's a really good question because the approaches do vary quite significantly, especially if you compare, say, the United States and the European Union. In the United States right now, there isn't one single comprehensive federal law that broadly governs all personal data privacy, not like a single umbrella law. Instead, modern U.S. privacy laws tend to focus on specific types of data, like, say, healthcare data, which is highly sensitive, or financial data, or they target specific entities, like federal government agencies.
So it's more targeted.
Yeah, it's a bit like a patchwork quilt, different laws covering specific areas, specific sectors, rather than one single blanket rule covering everything. This can actually make compliance pretty tricky for businesses that operate across different sectors. They have to navigate multiple sets of rules. However, it is worth noting that a few U.S. states, most famously California with its CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act, have enacted their own broader general applicability privacy laws. These apply to businesses operating within their borders or handling data of their residents, adding more layers to that quilt.
Right, the patchwork quilt for the U.S., with states adding their own unique stitches.
Right.
And Europe. How does their approach differ?
It's a stark contrast, really. The European Union has enacted one truly comprehensive data privacy law that applies across the board. This is the General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR, which became effective back in May 2018. And this is the big one. It's often seen as a global benchmark, a gold standard for data privacy, because it applies generally to pretty much all entities entrusted with personal data within the EU. It sets a unified and, frankly, very robust standard across the entire bloc.
A single strong umbrella versus a patchwork quilt.
That's a good way to think about it. It's a very different philosophical approach. The GDPR really aims for consistency and broad protection, prioritizing the individual's rights, like the right to be forgotten, and giving people more control over their data.
Okay, let's zoom in on one of those specific areas you mentioned, one that touches all our lives: health information, your medical records, insurance claims, even just a note from a doctor's visit. Health data is incredibly personal, maybe the most sensitive data we have. We're talking about EPBA in the U.S. Many people have heard of it, maybe think patient privacy, but I suspect it's far more complex than that, right? What are some of the maybe unexpected nuances or common misunderstandings about how it actually protects our health info?
You're absolutely right. It's far more than just a simple doctor-patient confidentiality agreement you might sign at the clinic. The Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, ICARIA, passed way back in 1996. It was a landmark piece of legislation in the U.S. Its initial purpose was actually quite broad, including making health insurance more portable if you changed jobs. But a key part required the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, to adopt national standards for healthcare privacy and security. In direct response to that CIPA mandate, HHS subsequently adopted two crucial rules: the privacy rule and the security rule. Together, MHA and these resulting rules regulate precisely how the healthcare industry must maintain and disclose health information. And one common misunderstanding, as you hinted, is thinking it only applies to your doctor or hospital. It actually has a much wider reach within the whole healthcare ecosystem.
Okay, so tell us more about the privacy rule first then. What does it govern and who exactly does it apply to? You said it's broader than just doctors.
Certainly. The HIPAA privacy rule specifically governs the privacy of what's legally termed protected health information, or PHI. This includes pretty much any information about your health status, the provision of health care to you, or payment for health care that can be linked back to you as an individual. This rule applies to specific healthcare-related entities and businesses, which HIPAA calls covered entities. This includes, yes, healthcare providers that transmit health information electronically, so your doctor's office, hospitals, clinics. It also includes health plans themselves, like your insurance company, and healthcare clearinghouses, which are kind of intermediaries that process non-standard health information into a standard format.
Okay, providers, plans, clearinghouses. Anyone else?
Yes, and this is crucial. It also applies to what are called business associates. These are basically service providers. Think of a billing company that processes claims for a hospital, or an IT service provider managing patient data systems, or even a cloud storage provider where electronic health records are kept. If these businesses need access to PHI to perform services for the covered entities, they are also bound by HIPAA rules. The privacy rule strictly outlines when a covered entity is permitted to use and disclose PHI without needing further explicit authorization from the individual.
Like when? When is it okay to share without asking me again?
Well, disclosures to the individual themselves, obviously. For essential treatment, payment, and general healthcare operations, the practical necessities of running a healthcare system. Also, disclosures that are just incident to an otherwise permitted use. For example, if a nurse calls out your name in a waiting room, even if others might overhear, that's generally considered an incident to providing your treatment. PHI can also be used or disclosed if you give valid, specific authorization, or sometimes after giving you an opportunity to agree or object to certain limited disclosures, like maybe to family involved in your care. It can also be used as a limited redacted data set, meaning identifying details are removed for things like research, public health activities, or certain healthcare operations. And finally, it permits disclosures for specific public interest and benefit activities that are required or permitted by other laws, like reporting certain diseases or suspected abuse. It's really about finding that careful balance between facilitating patient care and ensuring robust privacy protections, always with that core idea of patient control where possible.
That helps clarify the nuance there. It's not just a blanket ban on sharing. Okay, so that's the privacy rule. What about the security rule? Does it cover the same ground, or is it a distinct layer of protection?
It's a distinct and absolutely crucial layer. The iPay security rule specifically governs electronic PHI, or ePHI. While the privacy rule deals with the confidentiality of all forms of PHI paper, oral, electronic number, the security rule zeroes in specifically on the digital aspect, which, let's face it, is increasingly how most health information is handled today. Under this rule, all covered entities and their business associates have several key obligations regarding ePHI. They must ensure its confidentiality, integrity, and availability. That means keeping it private, making sure it's accurate and not improperly altered, and ensuring it's accessible to authorized users when needed for care. They also have to protect against reasonably anticipated threats to the security of that information, like viruses or hacking attempts, and protect against reasonably anticipated impermissible uses or disclosures, like an employee snooping where they shouldn't. And vitally, the organization itself is responsible for ensuring compliance by its entire workforce. Everyone from doctors and nurses to the admin staff and IT folks must follow these strict security standards.
So how do they actually do that? What kind of protections does the security rule require?
To achieve these goals, HIPAA mandates different types of safeguards. You can think of them like the multi-layered defenses of that digital fort we talked about earlier. They're broken down into three main categories. First, there are administrative safeguards. These are essentially the policies, procedures, and actions to manage security measures. The rules of the fort, if you will. This includes things like having formal security management processes to identify and manage risks, assigning a specific person or role with security responsibility, workforce security measures like background checks and training, information access management to define who gets access to what ePHI, security awareness and training programs for all staff, having detailed procedures for responding to security incidents, developing contingency plans for disasters like data backups and recovery, and performing regular evaluations of how well the security measures are working. These are the blueprints and the ongoing management plan for the fort's security.
Okay, so the policies and people part, what else?
Then we have physical safeguards. These address the physical security of the environment where ePHI is stored or accessed. These are the actual physical barriers and controls. Think of them as the walls, locks, and guards of the fort. They include things like facility access controls, locked doors, keycard systems, maybe even security cameras monitoring server rooms. Workstation use policies ensuring computers handling ePHI are in secure locations, not just left open in public areas. Workstation security measures like requiring screensavers with passwords and automatic logoffs after inactivity, and device and media controls like rules for securely wiping or destroying old hard drives or encrypting laptops that might leave the building. It's basically about controlling who can physically get near the data and the devices that hold it.
Makes sense. Walls and locks. What's the third category?
And finally, there are technical safeguards. These are the technology-based controls used to protect ePHI. These are the digital locks, the alarms, the surveillance systems within the fort. They include access control mechanisms like requiring unique user IDs and strong passwords, perhaps using multi-factor authentication to make it harder for unauthorized users to log in. There are audit controls, which are like digital logs that track who accessed what ePHI and when, creating a trail if something goes wrong. Data integrity controls are measures to ensure that ePHI is not improperly altered or destroyed, keeping the information accurate and reliable. Person or entity authentication methods are used to verify that a person or entity seeking access to ePHI is who or what they claim to be. And finally, transmission security protects data while it's moving across networks, for example, encrypting emails containing ePHI so it's unreadable if intercepted. These technical safeguards are really the nuts and bolts, the digital armor, protecting electronic health data. Together, these three types of safeguards form a comprehensive defense system that's meant to be constantly monitored and updated.
It sounds incredibly thorough, a lot of layers. And then things got even tighter, didn't they, with the HI Tech Act back in 2009. That seemed to really push healthcare into the digital age. Many of us probably remember that big push for electronic health records around then.
Yes, exactly. The Health Information Technology for Economic and Clinical Health Act, or HITECH Act of 2009, was a significant amendment to HIPAA. Its primary purpose was, as you say, to actively promote the adoption and meaningful use of health information technology. It aimed to accelerate that transition from paper charts to electronic health records, or EHRs. Think of it as a big government-backed initiative to modernize healthcare data management, partly through financial incentives. HITECH amended HIPAA in a few crucial ways. Notably, it substantially increased the penalties for HIPAA violations. This made noncompliance a much more costly affair for organizations, really putting more teeth into enforcement. It also mandated that patients must be given the option to obtain their health records in an electronic format, which empowers individuals with greater access and control over their own health data. And a very important clarification was that it explicitly made business associates, those third-party vendors, directly liable for complying with HIPAA security provisions, closing a potential loophole where sensitive data might have been less protected when handled by a vendor.
Okay, steeper penalties, patient access to electronic records, making vendors directly responsible. Anything else major from HITECH?
Yes, arguably the most significant change brought by HITECH, and one that had major implications for individuals, was the addition of robust breach notification rules. Before HITECH, the requirements for notifying patients about breaches were less stringent. HITECH requires that covered entities must provide notice of a breach of unsecured PHI to all impacted individuals without unreasonable delay, and certainly no later than 60 days after the discovery of the breach. This added a crucial layer of transparency and accountability. It ensures that individuals are informed relatively quickly when their sensitive health information has been compromised, allowing them to take steps like monitoring their credit reports or changing passwords to protect themselves from potential identity theft or fraud resulting from the breach.
Right, that 60-day notification seems key for individuals. Okay, moving back to the bigger global picture now, you mentioned the GDPR in Europe earlier. It became effective in May 2018 and really seems like it shifted the landscape for international businesses, imposing very strict standards compared to that U.S. patchwork approach.
It absolutely was and continues to be a game changer. The GDPR became the European Union's general applicability law regulating data privacy, applying broadly across sectors. And its impact was felt, and is still felt, worldwide. It lays out very specific circumstances under which processing personal data is lawful. Primarily, it requires explicit, informed consent from the individual, or processing must be necessary to comply with a clear legal obligation, or fulfill a contract, or protect vital interests, or perform a public task, or for legitimate interests pursued by the controller, provided they don't override the individual's rights. And what's really notable is how strict it is regarding enforcement. It imposes potentially steep penalties for violators. Fines can reach up to 20 million euros, or 4% of a company's total worldwide annual turnover from the preceding financial year, whichever is higher. That financial hammer really got the attention of global companies and incentivized compliance efforts everywhere, forcing many organizations outside the EU to reevaluate their data handling practices if they touched EU data.
Wow, 4% of global revenue. That's serious. And you mentioned its scope goes beyond just Europe.
Yes, and that's key to its global impact. While it's an EU law, its scope extends far beyond the EU's geographical borders. This extraterritorial reach is what makes it so significant globally. GDPR applies to data controllers and processors based in the EU, obviously, even if the actual data processing happens outside the EU. But crucially, it also applies to controllers and processors not based in the EU if they're offering goods or services, even for free, to individuals who are in the EU. Or if they are monitoring the behavior of individuals within the EU, like tracking website visitors. So think of a US-based e-commerce site that ships products to European customers, or a global social media platform with European users. They likely fall under GDPR. Furthermore, it can apply to controllers not based in the EU, but where EU member state law applies via public international law, for example, at an EU member state's embassy or consulate outside the EU. So the bottom line is, even if your company isn't physically located in Europe, if you process the personal data of people in the EU, GDPR very likely applies to you, effectively forcing a high global standard of care for that data.
That broad reach is truly remarkable. It's almost like Europe set a global privacy standard by saying, if you want to interact with our citizens' data, you have to play by our stricter rules. And it's not just about the potential penalties, right? There are core principles that businesses have to follow. These seem to really underpin the whole philosophy of the law.
That's exactly right. GDPR is built upon 6 foundational principles for processing personal data. Following these is mandatory, and they really encapsulate the law's thoroughness and its philosophy of data protection by design and by default. First, there's lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. Data processing must be lawful, fair towards the individual, and transparent. Individuals should clearly understand how their data is being collected, used, and protected without ambiguity or hidden clauses. Second, purpose limitation. Data must be collected only for specified, explicit, and legitimate purposes that are clearly communicated to the individual before or at the time of collection. You can't just collect data for one reason and then decide to use it for something completely different later without a valid legal basis, like fresh consent. There are some limited exceptions, like for archiving in the public interest, scientific or historical research, or statistical purposes, if safeguards are met.
Okay. Lawful, fair, transparent, and stick to the original purpose. What else?
Third is data minimization. Processing must be adequate, relevant, and strictly limited to what is necessary in relation to the purposes for which they are processed. Basically, collect only the data you actually need for that specific purpose, nothing more. Avoid excessive data collection. Fourth, accuracy. Personal data must be accurate and, where necessary, kept up to date. Every reasonable step must be taken to ensure that inaccurate data, considering the purposes for which it's processed, is erased or rectified without delay. Fifth, storage limitation. Data should be kept in a form which permits identification of individuals for no longer than is necessary for the purposes for which the personal data are processed. Once the purpose is fulfilled, the data should generally be deleted or anonymized. Again, similar exceptions exist for archiving, research, or statistics with safeguards. This reduces the risk associated with holding onto old, unnecessary data. And finally, sixth, integrity and confidentiality. Personal data must be processed in a manner that ensures appropriate security, including protection against unauthorized or unlawful processing and against accidental loss, destruction, or damage. This requires using appropriate technical and organizational measures, like encryption, access controls, security training, etc. These 6 principles together really give you a sense of the comprehensive approach GDPR takes. It's designed to empower individuals with meaningful control over their personal information and sets a very high bar for organizations handling that data.
It certainly sounds comprehensive. But even with such robust laws setting high bars, moving data globally still presents unique challenges, doesn't it? Especially between regions with different legal traditions, like the EU and the US. It seems like there's been this constant push and pull, almost like an ongoing legal saga, trying to find a way to make data transfers work legally.
It absolutely has been, and it really highlights the deep complexities of governing data flows across borders when you have different legal systems and, frankly, different underlying philosophies about privacy and government access to data. Historically, to try and facilitate that vital transatlantic commerce and allow companies to legally transfer personal data from the EU to the United States, a framework called the Safe Harbor was implemented back in 2000. However, the EU's highest court, the Court of Justice of the European Union, CJEU, declared that framework invalid in 2015. The main reason cited was concerns about U.S. government surveillance practices revealed at the time and the perceived lack of effective legal remedies for EU citizens whose data was transferred to the U.S. and potentially accessed by U.S. intelligence agencies.
Okay, so Safe Harbor fell. What came next?
As a direct result of Safe Harbor being invalidated, the EU and the U.S. quickly negotiated a replacement called the EU-U.S. Privacy Shield. This came into effect in 2016, designed again to support those vital transatlantic data flows by providing stronger assurances about data protection and redress mechanisms for EU individuals. This really highlights that constant negotiation needed for international data flow, trying to adapt to evolving legal interpretations and rebuild trust. But then, in another major development, in July 2020, the CJEU declared the Privacy Shield invalid as well.
Oh, wow. Same court, same reasons.
Essentially, yes. The court again cited concerns that U.S. law did not provide adequate protection against U.S. government surveillance and that EU citizens lacked effective judicial redress in the U.S. if they believed their rights were violated after their data was transferred. It basically threw the system into significant uncertainty once again.
So if both Safe Harbor and Privacy Shield were struck down, we're in a bit of a legal limbo then. What does that mean for companies trying to operate across the Atlantic right now? So much business relies on that data flow.
Exactly. Companies that transfer personal data from the EU to the US are currently operating in a state of considerable legal uncertainty. There isn't a single universally recognized stable adequacy framework like Privacy Shield that has withstood legal scrutiny from the EU side for broad transfers. Now, negotiations for a new agreement, often referred to as the EU-US Data Privacy Framework, have been ongoing. President Biden issued an executive order aimed at addressing the EU's concerns regarding surveillance and redress. Based on this, the European Commission did adopt a new adequacy decision in July 2023. However, privacy advocates have already signaled intentions to challenge this new framework in court as well, so its long-term stability is still somewhat uncertain. In the meantime, companies often rely on alternative mechanisms like standard contractual clauses, SCCs, which are pre-approved contract templates often supplemented with additional safeguards. But even these face ongoing legal scrutiny and require complex assessments by the companies using them. It's also interesting that the U.S. Federal Trade Commission, FTC, which was responsible for enforcing Privacy Shield commitments within the U.S., stated that companies should continue to comply with their Privacy Shield obligations for a period, even after the EU invalidated it, adding another layer of complexity. This ongoing legal limbo really forces constant monitoring, legal consultation, and adaptation for any business involved in transatlantic data exchange, often at significant cost and potential risk. It's a prime example of how deep international legal and philosophical differences directly impact global commerce and data flows.
Okay, that transatlantic piece is clearly complicated and still evolving. Let's shift gears now from the broad privacy laws, the what and why of data protection, to the more practical, nitty-gritty of data security in action. Specifically, how is your data protected when you use your credit or debit card? This is where something called PCI DSS comes in. It sounds super technical, maybe a bit dry, but it's absolutely critical for every single transaction we make, whether you're buying coffee online or using your card at the grocery store.
It truly is critical. And yes, the name Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, or PCI DSS, sounds technical, but its purpose is very practical, protecting your financial data. It arose directly from need. With the explosion of cashless transactions online, in stores, and the corresponding rise in data breaches specifically targeting payment card information, the major players in the payment card industry realized they needed a unified security approach. So brands like Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover, and JCB formed the PCI Security Standards Council. This council created and now maintains the PCI DSS. Importantly, PCI DSS isn't a government law in the traditional sense. It's an industry standard, a comprehensive framework of requirements that any entity involved in payment processing must adhere to if they want to handle cards from these major brands. It's designed to promote robust data security when accepting, processing, storing, or transmitting payment card information.
So it's the industry policing itself, essentially, setting the rules for playing in their sandbox.
In a way, yes. But the consequences for non-compliance can be severe fines from the card brands, increased transaction fees, and potentially even losing the ability to accept card payments altogether. So it's become practically mandatory for any business, big or small. And one surprising thing for many is that even a small local coffee shop that only takes card payments occasionally is still technically subject to these same rigorous standards as a massive online retailer. The level of assessment might differ based on transaction volume, but the core requirements apply. It's all about protecting your cardholder data, no matter the size of the business accepting the payment.
Okay, so it's like a set of industry-defined best practices and mandatory rules designed to be the digital vault for our payment information. You mentioned it has a specific structure. I think the outline said 6 overarching goals encompassing 12 detailed requirements.
That's right. It's structured logically. The 6 high-level goals provide the framework. 1, build and maintain a secure network and systems. Think firewall, secure configurations. 2, protect cardholder data. Encryption, secure storage. 3, maintain a vulnerability management program. Patching systems, antivirus. 4, implement strong access control measures. Who gets access? Authentication. 5, regularly monitor and test networks. Logging activity, security testing. 6, maintain an information security policy, having clear rules and responsibilities.
Okay, those make sense as broad goals, covering networks, data, vulnerabilities, access monitoring, and policy. And under these sit the 12 specific requirements.
Exactly. Those 12 requirements get into the specific controls needed to meet the goals. For example, Requirement 1 is about installing and maintaining a firewall configuration to protect cardholder data. Requirement 3 is about protecting stored cardholder data, maybe through encryption or truncation. Requirement 8 is about identifying and authenticating access to system components, like using unique IDs and strong passwords. Requirement 12 is about maintaining a policy that addresses information security for all personnel. These requirements cover everything from technical configurations to physical security to policies and procedures. The key takeaway from PCI DSS is that security is never a one-time fix. It's a continuous, active process. It requires constant vigilance, regular testing, patching, and updating policies.
It sounds like a lot for businesses to manage.
It certainly can be, especially for smaller businesses. Some requirements, like maybe Requirement 6, develop and maintain secure systems and applications, are particularly challenging because they're not just about installing something, they're about ongoing processes, like secure coding practices and timely software patching.
Okay, to really bring this to life and understand how it protects us, let's visualize a typical card payment transaction. Walk us through it. Where and how do these PCI DSS requirements actually get applied in a split second after we swipe, tap, or click buy? Because it's not just one company holding our data, right? It's moving through a chain.
Absolutely. It's a complex network, a real relay race of data between different entities, and all of them involved in handling that cardholder data are bound by PCI DSS. Let's walk through a typical flow. It starts, obviously, when you, the customer, make a purchase at a business. You might use a physical debit or credit card at a point-of-sale terminal, or you enter your card details on a website, a virtual transaction. That transaction information then needs to be processed. It usually goes from the merchant system, their website or terminal, to a third-party payment processor or gateway. This often happens over the network of one of the major card brands, like Visa or MasterCard, sometimes called the card network. The transaction data is then securely sent, often via that gateway, to the business's bank. This bank is known as the acquiring bank or merchant bank. They acquire the transaction from the merchant. The acquiring bank then takes that transaction and submits a payment authorization request back to the relevant card network, Visa, MasterCard, etc. The card network acts as the central switchboard. It routes that authorization request from the acquiring bank to your bank, the bank that issued your credit or debit card. This is called the issuing bank. Your issuing bank checks if you have sufficient funds or credit, performs fraud checks, and then approves or declines the transaction. It sends that response back through the card network to the acquiring bank, and finally, the approval or decline message gets back to the merchant's terminal or website, often in just a second or two. Then later, usually in batches, comes the settlement process where the actual funds move. It's a rapid, multi-step process, and it's important to remember the exact sequence and the specific technologies used, like different types of authorization messages, encryption methods, or maybe tokenization where the real card number is replaced with a temporary token, can vary depending on the specific card network, the banks involved, and the payment processor. But at every single stage of this journey, those PCI DSS requirements are meant to be enforced.
Okay, that's a clearer picture of the journey. So how do specific PCI DSS requirements plug into that chain? Let's take a couple of key examples.
Okay, let's look at 3 critical requirements and see how they apply across that network involving the retailer, the acquiring bank, the card network, and the issuing bank. First, let's take requirement 4. Encrypt transmission of cardholder data across open public networks. This is absolutely vital for protecting data while it's moving data in transit. This applies whenever cardholder data travels outside of a secure internal network. So when the retailer's point-of-sale terminal or website sends your card data to their payment processor or acquiring bank, especially if it crosses the internet or other public networks, that data must be strongly encrypted using industry-standard protocols like TLS, Transport Layer Security. Think of it like putting your sensitive payment details inside a securely locked, opaque digital envelope before sending it. Even if someone managed to intercept the transmission, all they'd see is scrambled, unreadable code. This encryption is crucial not just from the merchant to the processor, but also for communications between the acquiring bank, the card network, and the issuing bank whenever data crosses potentially insecure networks.
Okay, so locking the data down whenever it moves over the internet. Makes sense. What's another key one?
Let's look at requirement 7. Restrict access to cardholder data by business need to know. This is all about limiting who can actually see or use the sensitive cardholder data, based strictly on their job responsibilities. It's the principle of least privilege applied to payment data. At the retailer, for example, maybe only specific authorized personnel involved in payment processing or refunds should have access to full card numbers, not every single employee. Systems should be designed to mask card numbers on screens or receipts whenever possible, like showing only the last 4 digits. At the acquiring bank, the card network, and the issuing bank, access to databases and systems containing cardholder data must be strictly controlled. This means having processes to grant access based on roles, using unique user IDs so actions can be traced, and very importantly, promptly revoking access when an employee changes roles or leaves the organization. It's about ensuring that only the minimum necessary number of people have access to the sensitive data, reducing the risk of both accidental exposure and malicious internal theft.
Right. Limiting the number of eyes that can see the sensitive stuff. Good principle. One more example.
Okay, a really crucial one for ongoing security is Requirement 11. Regularly tests security systems and processes. This is what ensures the digital fort isn't just built strong initially, but that its defenses are constantly checked, maintained, and improved against new threats. PCI DSS mandates that all entities in the payment chain, the retailer, the banks, the processors, must regularly test their security. This isn't a one-time checkup, it's continuous. It involves things like running regular vulnerability scans, both from inside the network and from the outside, to identify known security weaknesses in systems. It often requires performing penetration tests, where ethical hackers are hired to actively try and break into the systems to find exploitable flaws before real attackers do. It also includes things like monitoring file integrity to detect unauthorized changes, using intrusion detection and prevention systems to spot and block malicious activity, and regularly reviewing security logs and alerts. This constant testing and auditing cycle is absolutely critical for maintaining security over time, adapting to the ever-evolving threat landscape, and ensuring that the protections for your financial data remain effective.
So it's not just building the walls, it's constantly checking for cracks, testing the alarms, and looking for new ways attackers might try to get in.
Precisely. It's an ongoing, active defense posture required across the entire payment ecosystem.
It's clear then that securing your card data isn't down to just one company or one single defense. It's a highly coordinated, multi-layered effort involving many different players, all supposedly following these detailed PCI DSS rules. It's really a testament to how complex our digital financial world has become, and frankly, how much effort goes into trying to make it seem seamless and secure for us, the end users, every time we pay. It also underscores that even with all these standards, vigilance is key for the businesses implementing them, and for us as consumers monitoring our accounts. So wrapping up today's deep dive, we've really journeyed through quite a landscape. We looked at the intricate world of data privacy laws, from the broad, sweeping GDPR in Europe to the sector-specific protections of HOOKA and ATAC in the U.S. healthcare system. And then we explored the essential data security standards, like PCI DSS, that underpin the safety of our everyday payment transactions. It's truly a complex web out there, but hopefully understanding it better shows how it's designed, at least in theory, to protect us.
I think what really emerges is this picture of constant evolution. We see rules and technologies continually adapting, trying to strike that difficult balance between the convenience we all want in our digital lives and the fundamental protection our personal data requires. It really highlights the critical importance of understanding not just what data is being collected about us, which is often a lot, but also how rigorously it's supposed to be protected through these complex legal frameworks and technical standards. And as we discussed, the enormous financial and deeply personal costs when those protections fail.
Absolutely. And hopefully knowing more about these frameworks, IPA, GDPR, PCI DSS, empowers you, our listeners, to better understand the digital world you navigate every single day. Maybe it helps you see the hidden infrastructure that makes online life possible, and perhaps even helps you make more informed choices about sharing and managing your own data moving forward. It's not just about corporate compliance. It's really about digital literacy for all of us in the 21st century.
So looking ahead, as we continue to generate and share exponentially more data about our lives online, and as powerful new technologies like AI, quantum computing, and advanced biometrics emerge, constantly pushing the boundaries of what's possible with data analysis and identification, it begs the question, what new forms of privacy protections and security standards will we need to invent to truly keep our digital selves safe in that future? What does privacy even mean when technology can potentially infer so much about us? What's the next frontier in this ongoing battle for data protection? And how will our societal understanding of privacy itself continue to evolve in a world where data is becoming ever more central to absolutely everything we do?